Greetings. Welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kwasi Konadu, or as my mom favorite like to say, Rayon. On this episode, we ask an essential question that appears in all cultures across the world. And it matters about prayer, but it's a question about prayer, which is, to whom do we pray when we pray? Now, there are different kinds of prayer, different ways to do this, which I'll get into in a few seconds. But I want to put to the side libation, which is another form of prayer that I've done before in the previous video. So if any of you missed that one, you can check it out on your own. For this one, I want to focus on prayer either through the mouth, in the head, or in the heart. Now, the prayer through the mouth is the most common one. That is, you would actually utter words from your mouth. Just I'm speaking to you through this video is one form of utterance. The other form of prayer is in the mind, where you are talking in your mind to whomever you are speaking to. The third form of prayer is in your heart. That is much more of less of speech, and it's much more of a feeling and a sensibility in your heart, which is your soul. And so these are the three major ways in which one communicates the sentiment, the feeling, the ideas that you want to communicate to whomever which you pray to. Now, that said, here's the essential question. To whom do we pray, right? Clearly, the most immediate response is going to be God, the Creator, or different forms or variations of that Supreme Being, and so on and so forth, that appears throughout the world. In the African world, of course, we have a plethora of vocabularies that come out of particular cultures, we mean particular languages. And so, for example, in the Akan language, there is no one singular term for or that approximates the idea of God. Instead, there are adjectival phrases that describe the qualities of God as Supreme Being, because the idea is that our human minds, our human consciousness isn't equipped enough or sufficiently to capture in one term the magnanimity, the incomprehensiveness of this totalizing force that we refer to variously as God and the Creator. And so in the Akan Chi language, we have Odumankuma, or Chidiampong, or Nyame, Shining One, and so on and so forth. Omosu, the bringer of rain, Anansikokuru, that is the architect, the architectural spider that created the universe and everything therein, and so on and so forth. Among the Yoruba people, it is Odudua, sometimes it's Olodumare, but Odudua. Among the peoples of African ancestry who embrace various forms of Islam, whether it's Sunni, Shiite, Wahhabi, or those beyond, their deity or supreme deity is Allah. Even though in the history of Islam, Allah was a minor divinity that was elevated by the Prophet Muhammad to the only divinity. So there's a backstory there. As all spiritual cultures and religions have backstories, right? And they have their origin stories for their major figures therein. And so, does it matter, you might be thinking, to whom do I pray when my prayer is made, whether in the soul and heart, in the mind, or through words? In some ways, the form doesn't matter, right? Think of the form like water. Water can be liquid, solid, or gaseous. Ultimately, immediately, and far beyond, it is still water. And that is its molecular structure, its integrity is still water, right? Whatever the form may be. So the form doesn't matter as much. But to whom do we pray, right? I'll give you a hint. Certain languages, and therefore cultures in the world, have certain gifts, certain attributes, but also limitations, right? And certain languages have the ability to communicate the idea of a singular or totalizing or ultimate being, that is God, Creator, etc., that may be there. Other languages don't. So, for example, take the Japanese language and the indigenous religion of the Japanese, which is Shintoism. There are no supreme being. There are no supreme deities. There is no creator or God per se in the language and therefore the cultures of Shintoism. However, there are simply just what? Spiritual beings, forces, and figures, including ancestral figures, that are variously referred to under one category, even though there are subcategories called kami, right? Kami. And so Shintoism is an example of a particular spiritual culture that doesn't have or choose not to have the vocabulary for a single totalizing force. So to whom do they pray? Then you have, let's say, Confucianism, which of course is found primarily in China, but also other parts of Southeast Asia. And Confucianism is more philosophy than it is a spiritual culture, right? Then you have Buddhism, which of course is found from India to China, Japan, South Korea, and so on. And Buddhism, of course, is more a spiritual culture, but it's also a mixture of philosophies. And so is it the Buddha? And then you think about the idea of the Buddha, and the Buddha is simply just a term, just like Christ. Christos mean anointed one. So it's not specifically referring to anything particular, but is referring to a sort of a type of figure, right? To which one can plead or appeal to. Now, back to folks within the African world, there are these creative force figures, or at least the terms for them, but it's possible that there are some limitations in those languages that, I don't want to say limitations or there may also be certain kinds of gifts attributed to certain languages where on others. And so it may matter, right? It may matter to whom do we pray. And the evidence or the consequence of whom do we pray is this. Have you prayed and prayed sporadically, episodically, often, and your prayers are not answered, right? Or they're not answered in the time and in the manner and the way in which you desire? If that is the case for you, then it does matter to whom do you pray, right? And so there are other terms that are used, whether it's the generic God or it's Jehovah, or if you're Rasta, it's Jah, which is a form of Jehovah, so it's really the same difference. And again, there are African varieties of that, but it depends. So for example, Southern Africa, the emphasis is more on ancestral spirits among the Shona people, among the Ndebele, among the Xhosa people, among the Zulu. It's a more focus on ancestral spirits in terms of the practicum of the spiritual culture than it is spiritual forces of nature, and therefore, and of course, there's a broader, more larger encompassing term for a spiritual force, because God is a spirit, the Creator is a spirit, the Supreme Being is a spirit, it's non-gendered, it's non-racial, it's a spiritual force, right? And so it may matter, and this is really a question that I'm posing to you, the viewer, to whom do you pray if your prayers are not answered or responded to in the manner and the way in which you have desired. Now, what you also want to keep in mind in this essential question about whom do we pray, because it does matter, and it may matter for you, especially if your prayers are not treated the way you may desire it, is that that spirit, that creative God force, that, or Nyame, or the Shining One, or whomever else you want to refer to, that force itself doesn't work on human time, again, because it is spirit. Its clock, its duration, it doesn't figure in. So, for example, to that force, 10,000 years is one of our days, right? Or I reverse that. That's a mistake. But it'll make more sense when I reverse it. 10,000 human years is one day to it. Could be vice versa, but I think it's that way, right? Meaning time doesn't function and matter as much. So you may want your prayer answered in the next few seconds, or the next half an hour, or the next day, or the next week. That God creative force does not operate in that metrics, right? Doesn't operate within that particular frame of reference, because we're dealing with humans and we're dealing with spirits. And even though humans are spirits, but we're captured into this, or arrested into this human form. And so we are arrested to the limitations of these human form, including time. Right? And so think about it. To whom do you pray? And if you think about it closely and deeply, you may want to make some adjustments to get the results that you want, because prayer does work, whether it's in the soul and heart, in the mind, or through the words. And the form doesn't matter, but the target does matter, right? Just like if you shoot an arrow towards a bullseye and you off target, you won't get the results you desired. And so it does matter in many ways to whom do you pray, but I won't tell you to whom you should pray, because that's a question between you and your creative force. For Powered by Nyame, I've been your guide and host. Hope you share your comments, your thoughts, your questions in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Click on notifications, and I'll see you for another episode on Powered by Nyame. Stay well.